Well, that was very nice. Thank you, Joe. Heartwarming. Just want to say a really big welcome to you, particularly if you're here as a visitor. And it may be that you're here, this isn't kind of like your local church, but it's a place that you come to sometimes on a Sunday night. And if that's you particularly, just give me a little wave. So I can, yeah, great. Great to see you. And also, if you're downstairs in the crypt, lovely that you're down there in the cool and enjoying yourselves. If you're not part of a local church, one thing that we regularly say is, get connected. We'd love to give you a welcome pack at the end of the service, just tell you how you can find your way into perhaps one of the small groups or pastorates or Woodlands Church, or help find you a church that would really suit you, even if it's not this one. Because being part of church is really key to following Jesus, and we really want to celebrate that. And at Woodlands at the moment, we're kind of heading towards summer pretty fast. We've got a children's holiday club in 2 weeks' time. We'd love to have a few more volunteers for that. You can send your children, you can sign up on the website. Musicians, team players, really helpful for that. And we've also got a whole bunch of mission trips going. Here this morning at Woodlands, we did top up our fund for devotion who are going to Romania. And if anybody wants to support that trip, there are a couple of offering baskets at the front. We'll just at the end stick some pennies in there, and that all goes towards helping us take more children who are street kids or in orphanages in Romania away for a camp which is being run by Joey and 14 of the young people from our church. So that's going to be a good thing. But right now I'm going to be preaching, and we're starting a new series, and it's called 21st Century Discipleship. And my feeling is this, really, that every era has some particular discipleship issues. There are some issues which are common to all Christians at all times. You know, how do we handle our sexuality, our finances, all that kind of stuff. But every age also has some particular challenges. So in the 19th century, there was a real challenge for the church. How do we deal with the issue of slavery that's part of our culture? There was an issue in the 19th century, how do we find justice for people in a kind of rapidly changing industrialized world? In the 20th century, a real discipleship issue for Christians all over the world was, how do we deal with totalitarianism? How do we handle following Jesus when our governments are totalitarian? So someone like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, wrestling with discipleship, the cost of discipleship, that actually cost him his life and his witness in the 20th century. And in the 21st century, there are some issues which are going to be unique to us. And tonight, as we think about care for the planet, the reason that's a discipleship issue for 21st century Christians is that until the late 20th century, we treated the earth as if it was an infinite resource. And in many ways, we would look at the world as a metaphor for infinity. And we talk about the mountains being unshaken and the seas, and and it was in our hymnology, and we're kind of saying, okay, the earth is a gift to us from God, and it sustains our life. And it's towards the end of the 20th century that we began to seriously engage with the fact that the earth is a fragile and finite resource. We had to recognize that partly just because of the huge scale of population increase, urbanization, and industrialization. In 1950, there were 2.5 billion people alive on the planet. Now, there are about 7.5 billion people alive on the planet. That's almost tripled since 1950. Almost kind of like within my lifetime. That is staggering. And as well as a vast population increase, the level of urbanization across the planet, the use of fossil fuels, the use of the resources, the production of plastics and the whole kind of petrochemical industry has kind of put enormous pressure on the planet. And we no longer believe that our life is sustainable for the planet for very much longer. And we could be like King Hezekiah. Do you know King Hezekiah in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament? He was a king who had bad news. He was told by the prophet, you've opened the doors of the Babylonians. They're going to come and destroy your kingdom in the generation to come. but it's not going to be in your time. And King Hezekiah was, oh, well, okay, not in my time. That's good news. And perhaps for some of us, we may think that the legacy of climate change and environmental challenges on our planet are not really going to come to roost in our time. And okay, we can enjoy it. I mean, it's very difficult to really take it seriously at times, isn't it? I mean, I find that. Doesn't Bristol look beautiful in the summer? I went to Cornwall for 24 hours last week. And, I was in the sea. It was gorgeous. The countryside looked great. It's very hard to believe that we're really in danger as a race. It's really hard to believe that the planet's in danger, I think, when you look around it. Do you find that hard to register? Yeah? I think it's difficult. So I think it's worth just listing. I'm just going to list for you some of the top 10 environmental challenges that we might face today. Well, first of all, that population change. I said that there are 7 billion people alive on the planet to Earth, 2.5 billion in 1950. The next jump to 9 billion could be as soon as 225. It's rapid. It's just exponential, the growth of population. Second of all, climate change, particularly global warming. And there is no doubt, 97% of scientists agree, really, that there is a human dimension to climate change. There's all kinds of issues around climate. Climate is a fluctuating thing. We know that. But the amount of CO2 in the environment, which is largely, there's a major human contributor, is leading to potentially catastrophic global warming. We have a challenge to keep under the kind of 2 degrees threshold of climate change. If we go beyond that, we reach tipping points where things go crazy. I mean, the thing about the environment is that systems depend on systems. One of the things that we see at the moment, for instance, is climate change, global warming, the loss of ice cap. And that has impacts in all kinds of ways, including rise of sea level, which has impact on low-lying lands, and some whole nations being put at risk. Bangladesh, low-lying country, increased flooding, all that kind of stuff. Massive problem. But another problem with the melting of the ice caps is that the ice caps are reflectors of heat away from the Earth. And so if they go, instead of a big white cap at both ends of the planet, we actually have dark space which absorbs heat. And so the rate of global warming increases. You have these kind of cyclical effects. Another huge issue for us on planet Earth is loss of biodiversity. And that, really, we're entering into an extinction phase. And there have been phases like that on the planet before, geologists will tell us. But it's affecting life at all levels. I've got a friend, one of my housemates, Sally, she loves Africa. She's actually working in South Sudan at the moment with the Red Cross, doing kind of disaster relief work there. But she loves Africa, but she was saying that within 15 years there may no longer be any elephants in the wild in Africa. Wouldn't that be a sad thing? But we also know at the other end, things like the insect life, bees, pollination, under threat, that so many species are under threat. I heard a statistic from Claire, 1/4 of mammals under threat. Is that right? Was it 1/4? That's staggering. And we don't know the implications when whole systems affect one another, and we don't know the outcome of what some of the loss of our species means. There's, we've, as well as producing CO2, we're nitrogen pollutants. Phosphorus and nitrogen, incredibly helpful in industry and in farming, and yet the kind of runoff of nitrates into the ocean is having a huge effect on food chain, on plankton life, massive danger. Access to clean water. 1/3 of people on the planet have no access to clean water today. It's predicted by 2050 it could be 2/3 of the planet don't have access to clean water. And one of the conflict areas that people predict in the next phase of planet Earth is water wars, as there's actually people willing to go to war over access to water, which is absolutely fundamental for all of us. Ocean acidification is a big deal. CO2 in the ocean is making the ocean more and more acid. What that does is it kind of destroys shell life. It's like osteoporosis for little shell creatures, and the coral reef is in danger. And again, that has implications for the whole food chain in the oceans. Combine that with overfishing, there have been estimates that by 2050 there will be no more fish in the ocean. And fish is a hugely vital food source for many human beings. And we're overfishing our food stocks at the moment. The level of pollution of plastics. Again, in the oceans, plastics everywhere. It gets in the food chain with seafood. But there's all kinds of pollutants. And Claire told us this morning that there are 18 billion nappies disposed of into landfill in the USA every year. 18 billion. And they each take 250 years to decompose, which is not a pleasant thought. We've got ozone layer depletion. We've got deforestation. Again, that's a massive issue. That about half of the native forest cover of planet Earth is gone, and that we're destroying particularly very crucial ecosystems in the rainforest, where so much of our pharmaceuticals and resources are based, animal and flora and fauna, actually being destroyed ruthlessly. And we've got, chainsaws and loggers, and we've got indigenous peoples really suffering. So, that's bad news, isn't it? And I suppose as I was kind of preparing this talk tonight, I thought, I'm going to be depressing, really. Because I think that the global picture is depressing. And it is so depressing that we may want to be in denial about it. Or we may actually find it hard to believe it's really as bad as that. Because, again, it hasn't really impacted us, the evidence that we have. But actually, global warming, it's I think 7 of the hottest 10 years on record have been in the last, since the year 2000. And, it's likely to get worse. So here's some reflections from me. As Christians, 21st century disciples, how should we live in the light of what we know? And one question I have is, does God care more about the planet or our post-industrial lifestyle? And I think we're really committed to our lifestyles, are we? I mean, life, it feels great, doesn't it, to have the resources that we have in our home. It feels very, very civilized to have all the gadgets, all the electricity, all the heating that we have. It makes life seem, that's how a human should live, with that level of dignity. Washing machines and tumbler dryers and dishwashers and on and on, Doesn't it feel, it feels like to give that stuff up would be tricky, wouldn't it? Would it? Cars. Tricky to give them up. And I just wonder how committed God is to our post-industrial development. Because I don't think he's that committed to it. I don't know that actually it's been that spiritually beneficial. If I look at human history, how much has human society benefited from technology? It seems to me that the most technologically advanced nations in the world are also the most godless. And one of the great things we've learned how to do is to invent weapons of mass destruction and stuff like that. It's kind of, has it really been beneficial for us to have all stuff in spiritual terms? Yes, humanly speaking. Yes, in terms of combating disease. Yes, in all kinds of ways. But is God committed to it? Would God let Western civilization fail? I think he would let Western civilization fail. It's failed before. Would God let the Roman Empire fail? The Roman Empire was an incredibly sophisticated civilization, and it failed. In Europe, there was a massive downturn, wasn't there, in terms of civilization. It's happened before, it could happen again. God's not committed to propping those things up. Second big question for us as global Christians: how does our care for the planet affect the poor? And I'm just going to ask Helen just to put up James chapter 5. There are two kind of key Bible readings for us today. One is in James 5, one's in the book of Leviticus. But in James chapter 5 has these kind of really pertinent words. It says at the start of the chapter, "Now listen, you rich people, weep and wail because of the misery that's coming upon you. Your wealth has rotted, moths have eaten your clothes, your gold and silver are corroded. Their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. You've hoarded wealth in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workmen who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. You've lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves in the days of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered innocent men who are not opposing you." And that could be a very graphic picture of global economics today, couldn't it? Because actually we stand in the West as those who've lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. And those who are mowing our fields are by and large not Ollie Matthews, though he does do a little bit of farming just down the road, but they're people in other nations of the world who are living in poverty, who are living with cash crops. The whole global economics is so rigged that they benefit us and we don't really give fair wages. That's thing number one. Thing number two about the poorest people in the world are the people who live in the most climatically risky parts of our planet. And it's the poor that are affected first and at most cost. And if you are aware of, say, Nigel Quarrell is here tonight. Give us a little wave, Nigel. So Nigel is Regional Director of Christian Aid. And one of the things Christian Aid have been campaigning about are just these kind of issues. Actually, care for the poor, aid for the poor, and climate change are very strongly linked. And if we're really going to see justice for the poor, then we have to see global justice in terms of the way that we use our power and the way we handle our prosperity. So it's a justice issue for us. That actually cutting CO2 levels may mean sustainability for people living in flood risk areas of the planet, for example. It may mean having an impact on the desertification, which is affecting the poorest areas of the globe, as well as California. So that's an issue. How does care for the planet affect stewardship of the environment itself? And our second reading is from Leviticus chapter 25, verses 1 to 7. And it seems to me that when God created the earth, he built into his wisdom for how we steward the earth sustainability. And you'll find that the Old Testament law, which is incredibly enlightened, talks about giving rest to animals and to the land itself. And the whole Sabbath principle, which is there to benefit men and women, is also there to benefit the land. So let's just read 25, 1 to 7. The Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather your crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a Sabbath of rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your untended vines. The land is to have a year's rest." Now, we know that farming principles, that to allow land to lie fallow and to recover, is just kind of basic farming. But it should speak to us of a principle that actually to ruthlessly exploit people, animals, or the very earth itself will lead to trouble. And it's not how God designed things to be. So, to my mind, for all kinds of reasons, Christians should be at the forefront of environmental campaigning, an environmental lifestyle. Now, the problem that we have as Christians historically around all kinds of issues is that there has been a polarization between the evangelicals and the activists, between the charismatics and the Pentecostals and the activists, between those who are interested in the soul and those who are interested in the body. And we've had major divides around those issues. And so there's a whole kind of tradition of activism and justice that's not been very strongly identified with churches which might look like us. And where for ourselves, perhaps in our history, in our tradition, where we are looking for encounter with God, where we're looking for a touch of his kingdom supernatural presence, where we're interested in introducing people to Jesus so that they find a relationship with him and they find their souls being saved and all that kind of stuff. We can see that as our priority, and other people can get on with the planet. But actually, these things belong together, don't they? The Bible has always been very clear. How can you speak blessing and talk about the comfort of God to people who are physically suffering? You can't just cheer yourself up, go well and not do anything about the practical needs. They belong together. And actually, God cares for all of it. God cares for men and women for sure, but he also cares for creatures. And he also cares for the beautiful world that he's made. And if he gave men and women the responsibility to steward the earth, how do we honor him when we look at his creation? If you read a book like Jonah, which is, sure, it's concerned about saving men and women, sending a preacher. But the scope of it includes all the animals as well. God loves the whole of creation, and he's passionate about it. So here's some reasons why I think Christians should be at the forefront of of speaking to our culture about issues to do with environmental change. First of all, we should be the people above all else who are not driven by materialism. We should be the people who are willing to be downwardly mobile because we are satisfied at heart level by the love of God and by being part of that whole family of believers. We should have so much of the love of God that we can afford to be generous with other things. And I think that ultimately, materialistic drives are very individualistic ones. They're about me having more. And in an individualistic world where we're separated from community and separated from the physical planet itself, we can be locked into lonely bubbles of consumerism, or little pockets of consumerism, or little fashion drives of consumerism. But as Christians, we should be, I think, wildly countercultural and be the people on the planet who are willing to be downwardly mobile. So many Christians have spoken out about this issue. And people like Ron Sider back in the day when I was young, but we need a fresh wave of that willingness to say we're willing to live more simply that other people can simply live. I mean, it's a cliche perhaps now, but it's a real issue. And what are we going to say to the aspirational Chinese and Indian subcontinent and African nation and the peoples of Latin America, the growing, burgeoning population of the world? Are we going to say to them, well, you were just a bit too late. We in Britain, who pioneered the Industrial Revolution and have earned our lifestyle, can sustain it, but you're not entitled to it? Or can we, who modelled the first round of change, can we model a different way of living? Now, if you listen to Claire Thompson, as you should, yes, a woman of faith, she will tell you, and I don't want to minimize all this kind of stuff as well, that there is tremendous innovation going into helping us live more sustainably, but also how we can also benefit from technology. Can technology help to save us? And that is a moot point. Can technology save us? We hope it can, can't we? Ultimately, I'm not sure that it can. I think it can help, but I don't think it can do it on its own. I think we still have to live a little bit more simply. One of the really tricky issues, this is a bit of a theological issue, which, I really don't quite know what I think about this as a Christian. But how many people is too many people? That's a hard one, isn't it? Because we see men and women in the image of God, and we venerate human life. But is it time to say population growth has to stop on the planet? Are there just too many people? I know I've contributed to that. I've contributed. To be honest, I think if I knew what I know now, when I was planning family, well, it was a joint effort actually, to be honest. I think I did plan to. Anyway, but I'm not sure that I would have felt that having more than 2 children was right, actually. Now, that would have then deprived the world of Joey and Perrin and Ben, and that's a mixed blessing. But but whatever the past, I think there is an issue for us in thinking, that is an issue. And I don't know I'm not giving any rights or wrongs on it, but I think it's something to think about. Because the planet is certainly not able to sustain 7.5 million people living at the standard of living that I live. There's no doubt about that. So if we want more kids, maybe we all have to live much more simply. Anyway. Here's another reason why as Christians we should be really grappling with this one. We are family with the poor of the earth who are believers. And most of the Christians on the planet now are poor. Most of the Christians on the planet are the ones suffering the effects of climate change. And they are brothers and sisters to us. Their lives are of equal value to our lives. They're loved by God. And we are connected with them. And we're connected with them, so we go, we travel, we communicate. We have brothers and sisters across the world. And we see, as we go and visit them and as we hear from them, the world through their eyes. And we say, we cannot neglect to stand with our brothers and sisters in the church, in the world. And more than that, actually, Jesus tells us to love our neighbour as ourselves. And he opens the threshold of neighbour really to say that people made in the image of God, that is everybody, in some sense, are our neighbours. And if we love them as we love ourselves, then we can't really love God passionately, deeply, without thinking about their well-being. And so it cuts really hard for us if we're really serious about this book and what Jesus says and how he tells us to live, about thinking about the well-being of others. And I'm so grateful, actually, that in Britain we have a tradition of charity and of charitable giving and a sense of responsibility for a planet, which I think is quite special. And I think that's in our culture, not just in the church. I think it's out there in British society, which is a wonderful thing. But we need to be leaders in it, don't we? It's a big issue. It's our family. And here's some positive things why we need to be leaders in environmental issues. We have got the opportunity for spiritual guidance for solutions. That's a big deal. See, right back in the early day, from the earliest days, God gave guidance to the people of Israel about the care of the environment. It was prophetic. They didn't work it out for themselves. It was given by revelation. The law of Moses, they weren't standing like we are on the threshold of scientific research and saying, this is how you need to care for your animals, this is how you need to care for planet Earth. It came to them by prophetic revelation. Do you think there could be prophetic revelation out there from God for his people to bring his wisdom to planet Earth today? I think there could be. And it could be that some of you who are actually working in those industries particularly are not just going to apply your scientific head and your educational head, but your prophetic head to it. And God is going to speak to you about solutions. That's good news, isn't it? So we need to be a resource in that way. And it's great that Bristol actually is a centre for all kinds of new technology, and a number of people in this church, particularly looking at alternative energy supplies and all kinds of other sustainable things, and we commend those to you. Second thing, as believers, we just reverence God. And we reverence him in his creation. And so actually caring for the creation becomes part of our worship of God. And it's a joy. Like most of you, I guess, I find I'm moved by the presence of God in creation. Are you with me on that one? Big horizons, mountain views, seascapes, forests. They move us, don't they? And we see the beauty of God. When we study, we see the incredible intricacy of what he's made, the balance of what he's made. We see a beauty in it. We see a wisdom in it. It makes us want to worship and honor him. And we say we cannot allow his image in creation to be diminished. And we want, as we restore for it, we do it with a joy in our hearts, a sense of we're working for the kingdom. It's fantastic. And we also want to be a prophetic witness to our culture, whether or not we ultimately make the difference. And really, whether or not what you and I do around environmental issues and around environmental change, whether or not we save civilization as we know it by what we do or not, isn't the issue. The issue is it right? And is it honoring God? And is it lighting a candle rather than cursing the darkness? I think that those are the kind of perspectives we need to have. You know, Dietrich Bonhoeffer gave his life. The prophetic witness of the confessing church in Germany, in the Third Reich, was very vulnerable. They were not going to win a battle against Germany by themselves, against Nazism by themselves. But that didn't stop them doing what was right. It doesn't stop us doing what's right. And witnessing. You see, because the thing is, and in a minute I'm going to invite my friend Ben up here, and we're going to conclude. But the Christian hope is very simply this. God hasn't abandoned planet Earth. He never intended to abandon it. And some of us have got a bit of a theology that's a rapture theology that says, you know, Earth is finite and you know, we're all going to be caught up in the sky and we'll be there in heaven, as if heaven is detached from the earth. Whereas the biblical picture is all about heaven coming down to earth. Not God and us abandoning the planet, but about God coming in his fullness and filling the earth as the glory of the Lord fills the earth as the waters cover the sea, is the phrase, you know. And meeting Jesus in the air is about welcoming him up and bringing him back down, biblically. Not about us meeting him there and then off we go. It's a kind of like when a king comes to a city in biblical times, and the citizens of that city go out to meet him and they make the path straight for him and say, come into our city. That's what it's meant to look like. It's the book of Revelation finishes with a holy city coming down from heaven to earth, and it speaks of fruitfulness and a river with trees that bear their fruit monthly in season, and the leaves of the trees be there for the healing of the nations. And it's about renewal of the earth. And when we join in with renewal for the planet, like everything else that we do as believers, we're saying, can we bring the future into the present? And working for renewal of the planet through environmental initiatives is on the same level as praying for healing for people. When we pray for healing, we're wanting to bring the future into the present. We're saying, in those last days there'll be no more pain, no more sickness, no more death. Can we have some of that now? And when we do some reforestation, say, you know, there's going to be a renewed earth, but can we have some of that renewal now? Can it make a change? And can it bless the poor of the earth now, or whatever it is? So Ben Morley is part of Eco Congregation Woodlands. And let me give you this microphone, Ben. Just first of all, just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in environmental issues.
Okay, so I am, I guess, one of those people that does the technology in Bristol. I'm a scientist, I'm a technologist in Bristol. I'm about to start a new job working for the government, actually, so that could be quite interesting. In terms of getting engaged, I guess it's just something that's always been on my heart, and actually last year, as part of our pastorate, we had an evening looking at these sorts of issues and just really started to think, actually, yeah, this is actually quite important, and it's something that the church should be leading on, and it didn't appear to be. It's been great, actually, that quite recently, the Pope has started to actually say some things around these sorts of issues, and yeah, it just really felt, especially with Bristol Green Capital this year, it felt like the church was quite mute on the subject, I guess. So yeah, just started to think, actually we should be doing something. This is quite important, so yeah. Okay, so what are we doing, or what are you helping pioneer for us as a congregation so that we can actually make a tangible response? Okay, so Dave said some really big things tonight. There's some really, really big challenges there, and it can get kind of to the point where you think, oh, I actually can't do anything here. It's far too big. We're talking about changing China and India and things like that, and you just think, oh, I can't do it. But actually, I think, we have to make a start. We have to start somewhere. We have to do something. So what we're doing in this church, and actually it's starting to spread to the other Woodlands group of churches, is we started to form a group looking at trying to become, as a start, an eco-congregation. It's sort of a national award that are given out to lots of different churches, and we see this as a kind of a first step. We see this as a step on the journey. And we're doing that right now. We've done an audit of the church, and now we're actually starting to think about what the tangible kind of things that we can do as a church, and really we do actually need some help in this. We've got quite a small group at the minute. There's a lot of work to do, and actually, yeah, we really, really need some help. Can you expand on that sort of help? Yeah, can Helen put my email address up on the... If you want to get involved, guys, and, some of the things we're looking at are quite simple. They're not... Yeah, that'll do. That's fine. Some of these things are actually, they're not, terribly difficult. They're not huge, big things. They're actually really tangible things that we can start out doing. And so we're starting to look at doing those things, but we do actually need the help. We need people to kind of lead these activities, to really get involved, to commit some real time to this. And if you feel like, what Dave said tonight has really kind of stirred you and you're thinking, yeah, actually, I actually do want to do something, but I'm not quite sure what to do, well, just drop me an email or see me in the foyer afterwards. And, there's a group of us. We'll get you involved in that group. And, yeah, we'll see what we can do. We'll see if we can make a difference. We can at least try, right? Brilliant. Thank you, Ben. One of the proposals that I think came out of discussion with people at Andrew Street and others is that in this year Bristol Green Capital, wouldn't it be great if all the churches, maybe 500 churches in Bristol, all went on to green energy tariffs? What would that say to Bristol as a prophetic sign? What would that, and if we all do it together, we get a good deal as well from the utility companies. But what is it that we can do corporately together that has visibility? And what can we do individually? And the small steps that we take, whether it's improving our recycling, using the bicycle or walking when we could be in our cars, whether it's giving money to Christian Aid or to other charities that will actually help ameliorate some of the effects of people living in the poorest situations. If it's writing to our MP or to the Prime Minister, if it's kind of praying about the big climate change conference that's happening in Paris later on this year, if it's kind of raising awareness with our neighbours, if it's planting some trees, whatever it is, if it's going on the internet and doing some research and doing all those things, there's so many things that we can do. But let's do it, first of all, with a spirit of worship and prayer, saying we're not doing this on our own. Well, let's do it with the resource of the Holy Spirit helping us to prioritise the things that are most on God's heart. Let's do it with a real compassion and care for the poor. But let's do something. I'm going to pray. Father, I want to thank you that you've given us so much. And part of the gift that you've given us is a beautiful world. That you've given us animals and plants that fascinate. Thank you for the way that little children are just so stimulated by being outdoors and in the natural world and how much they love animals. And we don't want to
lose our first love of the good gifts that you've given us by getting just wrapped up in our tablets and our stuff. Lord, we want to be open as well to the prompting of your Holy Spirit, where you say, come and follow me. And in this crucial time when the weight of the ages and the weight of civilization rests on us right now, help us to be willing to take steps of discipleship that please you. In Jesus' name, amen. As we go back into worship of God is going to affect, as I've kind of said, our care for the planet. So if we're going to sing songs with our mouth, let's go and try and live stuff out with our lives. But here at Woodies, we're both Anne, and we've taken a pretty nitty-gritty, crunchy subject tonight about discipleship. But we also know that as well as those big issues, God knows every hair on our head and knows the needs that are on our hearts. And, saving the planet, that's important to God. But saving you is important to God. And healing a nation is important to God, but healing you is important to God. Touching your body, your heart, bringing his love to you. And actually, if you're full of the presence and love of God, it's going to make everything else easier. So we love to pray, and we also have a ministry timer at the end of church here, and tonight's no exception. As we go into worship, some of us are just going to be over on the right-hand side there, and we'd love to pray with you if you're carrying needs or burdens tonight. It may be that you want to respond to something that I've said, and you actually want to commit yourself and just share that act of commitment with somebody. But it may actually be that tonight you've got some needs. And have you got some stuff there, Claire?